Our next panel session at Fintech in 2021 is all about Fintech and AI. We want to break down the financial verticals, and we're looking for new horizons. We're going to be talking about data sovereignty. How do we make sure who owns the data? How is it separated out? We're going to be talking about the EU's ambitions in this area, and then also looking at that how is data the fuel for the AI machines that we are creating? How are we going to work out ownership of that fuel? How are we going to work out who can use that fuel? It's a very good metaphor. And our moderator today is Mariana Terven, and she's director and of lead data sharing and public services at consulting firm InnoPay. They help organizations embrace these opportunities for digital transactions by looking at openness and collaboration. And she's also a strong advocate for data sovereignty and is the coordinator of Data Sovereignty Now. And it's a campaign talking to EU policymakers to educate them and make them more informed on these very important issues. Mariana, how are you this morning?
Labas, Lewis. I'm perfectly okay.
You're doing good. You're very good. Look at you with your Lithuanian there. Very nice there. So you're looking forward to the panel?
Yeah, I'm looking forward. We've got distinguished guests, and they are from a variety of backgrounds. So I'm sure we'll have a great panel. I'm looking forward to their opinions. And I think I want to throw some meaning in this discussion, and I think we're going to do that.
All right. Well, without further ado, let's start the panel.
Well, thank you, Lewis. That was really great. And I think we're ahead. We've got a great hour ahead. I mean, we've got an experienced risk manager with a sharp eye for human centricity. We've got a banker turned into a fintech AI entrepreneur. And we've got a journalist turned into a CMO for building humanoid robots. And then we've got, more sincerely, and I've just been introduced. I'm sure we'll have a blast coming hour. And it's a tremendous, interesting topic. And we're going to talk about the challenges and the opportunities. We're going to discuss the role of trust, the necessity for diversity, and all kinds of other topics our panelists would like to discuss. So in this charming double role of your moderator and panelist, let me give you my introduction to this topic, and then we'll go to all the other guests and we'll have a conversation on it. So, my short introduction to this. Well, you might know us from the Open Banking Monitor, but today I'm not going to discuss that. Actually, what I would like to discuss on this topic is I would like to talk about the fuel. Because if we talk about AI and fintech and breaking down verticals, and we could say algorithms and all the nice things about that, they're the engine, but data is the fuel. And for me, that is one of the paramount kernels of this discussion. How are we going to make sure that we will be able to have access to the data we need in order to get these services up and get these services right? And currently, there are some really interesting things going on, especially in this region, in the European region. The European Union has brought to light their data strategy, and it's quite fierce and ambitious. And it's centered around the thought of data sovereignty, which means we've all seen the consequences of the GDPR. But what you see now is a fierce development of privacy is not just about the misuse of data. Increasingly, it's also about the misuse of data. So how can we make sure that both citizens, consumers, and organizations, both public and private, can govern the data they generate? And we call that data sovereignty. So data sovereignty is all about being able, having the capability to manage the data you generate. And make no mistake, there's a lot of upcoming regulation. So Europe is really building on the house of this. And there might be something interesting to say on this. Of course, in all regions, there's a lot of stuff going on. But if you look at the regulatory train that the EU is now preparing, it's quite interesting because it sets it apart from other regions. So if you look more at the US-based model, which is really focused at the consumer, also the legal house is focused on the consumer. You can't even sue Facebook if you're not a customer. So there the focus is on the consumer. But it amounts to maybe responsibility of the individual, and it amounts to the winner takes all. Now, if we look to the other legal houses, more to the east, the focus is very much on data sharing. But the focus is far more from a state-led model. And Europe really wants to put a third model in place and say, here we want to have a human-focused, a human-centric economy focused on people and organizations. And this data sovereignty, you better dive into it, because you can turn it from a compliance issue into an opportunity. Because think about it. Right now, we already know that people become hesitant to share their data.
Hello, Lewis speaking.
And organizations are also hesitant to share their data. But actually, the fuel for all these nice things is actually having correct data. So what if we turn this whole thing around? And data sovereignty might seem like a strange concept or abstract, but we all know it. I can phone the four panelists as I know if I know their numbers. I don't need to know what provider they're on. But still, we saw it with the WhatsApp outage in Europe last week.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to talk to people on other platforms if you're not on the same platform. Now, why is that? Why can't I take my friends? Why can't I, from my WhatsApp to WeChat to Telegram to Signal, why is that not possible? So we think there are a few developments that are really going to support this whole development of making it more easy to share
4th of
data.
November seems fine, sure.
And the first thing is, data sovereignty is going to be paramount. It's going to be just as important as CO2 reduction. In the early days, there was no action perspective for that either. But now there is. And you better be serious about it because your customers ask about it. Second, we need agreements in place. We need protocols. Just like the GSM protocol made it possible to phone each other, we need a soft infrastructure for data sharing. And third, we need to focus on adoption. Bye-bye. So this is not a scientific just a scientific exercise. This is about creating ecosystems in which we can share data seamlessly. And I think in order to do so, we have a great stepping stone here in Europe with all this upcoming regulation, but we need to do it. And we need to create this soft infrastructure together. And for all your fintechs on the audience, I'd say dive into this topic and look around and make sure you still have this availability of data that you need to do your services and to create your products. So that was what I wanted to say to you. And with that short intro, which was more focused on data as the fuel, I would love to give the word to my fellow panelist, Jogi, and you're going to take it away on risk models. And of course, also your your favorite topic, I think. I would like to introduce you to take it away.
Marianne, thank you very much. Again, I think you mentioned the issue of this data. The key shift in GDPR and what you mentioned, the data sovereignty, the key shift is from focus on data privacy to control, the self-control by the users and businesses, instead of data being used for exploitation and manipulation by the big tech, as we are seeing. You mentioned Facebook. There's a lot going on about companies like Facebook and others. There's a body called Federal Trade Commission. We got a very smart person there. I believe she's from Yale School of Management, and we are seeing some a lot of antitrust issues which are trying to take care of those issues and so forth. But coming back to the issues of trust and data, and you mentioned the soft infrastructure. If I remember, I think you have a collaboration with Intel Corporation, and we have been having discussions with Intel, IBM, and other companies. How do we make this soft infrastructure happen by making it happen in the hard infrastructure? And there are issues which are being discussed called confidential computing, differential privacy, and things like homomorphic encryption. That means all of us can get the aggregate analysis if we want to say for healthcare data, but we can't see the actual records. We can get an analysis of financial transactions, but can't see the individual the individual specific data or business specific data. So those things are going on. Those are fascinating. But touching back on this thing, where we are in the phase of digital transformation, I was sharing with you, I had the pleasure of having the Dutch Netherlands cabinet minister of science, education, and culture visit with me long ago. That is about 3-4 years after I think we had this World Wide Web around 2000 or so. And we were talking about the digital transformation of that country. Similarly, back in Korea, Seoul, I had the opportunity to be invited for the Vision Korea campaign by the Mile Business TV network for a national keynote, national interview. We have come a very long way. But I think the two key things which have happened over this time, I was sharing earlier with Marianne, where we started in the beginning, and this ties into risk. And to your question, Suzanne, you mentioned about the issues of model risk methodologies and extreme risks and black swans. And the key question which I sometimes ask is your black swan, my white swan, or gray swan? The issue simply here is it depends upon the perspective, and the key shift which has been happening going back to the beginning of the beta version of web browser, around the time when I was invited to Silicon Valley and I gave a presentation on how to build global digital enterprises on what I call the wild web. And at that time, we had uncertainty, complexity, but now what we have is the adversarial nature of this data being intercepted, used, manipulated, and so forth. Therefore, there's a lot going into the big tech, but big tech and the big banks, they themselves are being hacked, compromised in many ways, and those issues are central and material at this point of time. But going back to the issues, I think the title of my focus, which I gave, had 4 different constructs. One I call the model risk management, and that comes from the issue of all your data is past, but all your decisions are about future. And the bigger differences between the past and future, what you're calling paradigm shifts, or we are calling punctuated equilibrium in different areas. The bigger the shift in terms of uncertainty, complexity, the bigger the challenge is. How do we connect looking in the rear view mirror? How do we drive into the future? That's the key challenge. The second thing which comes right in there is about the issue of controls, which I think Marianne mentioned. The controls and governance are central to all countries. There was a European Parliament, EU Parliament address. How do we ensure governance of AI, making sure AI does what it does, but not does what we don't want it to do? And that was the subject of one of my 3 keynote presentations at the Princeton University, focused on these issues. Therefore, coming back to these issues, all of our data is past, decisions are present, and the disconnect is in between. If we are working on some things which are routine, structured, procedural, which is what programming is about, we can actually automate the whole thing. But if they are non-routine, non-structured, non-procedural, specifically if you're shifting from what is called deterministic models to stochastic models, to where a lot of these models are going are very big, this sigmas, then we have very big sigma shifts. We are 100-year flood hitting every month, every day. We are seeing that happening in various contexts right now. In the weather patterns, for instance, we are seeing in the financial markets, the cyber, and so forth. Cyber is a very big issue. That's where the nature of many risks, especially when you think of the horizontal and vertical segments in fintech, like having advised earlier the government of Switzerland on the national banking transformation enabled by ex-Goldman Sachs bankers. If we look at the issues of how do we translate the understanding of risks, and how much does it cost to transfer that risk in terms of cyber insurance, for instance, or safeguard against it, or mitigate it if we can. Those mathematical properties of models which are applied in financial markets have been the subject of a lot of discussion going back to the global financial crisis. Now, that is in that context, I led the Wall Street hedge funds advance beyond the crisis. And basically, then I saw the same models being applied first by the cyber computing companies. But the biggest challenge is the mathematical properties of those models. They are different. Specifically, it is basically is the risk external or internal. Okay, think that way. I think terms in modeling they call exogenous, endogenous factors or variables. If you do structural modeling of risks, as I've been doing over the last 20, 30 years in various contexts. But the challenge here is basically the more and more the risks are external or endogenous. Therefore, when you shift from the buckets of risks in financial context or technology contexts or fintech contexts, where we have credit risk, market risk, liquidity risk, portfolio risk in the context of financial issues, then you got IT risk, data risk, cyber risk, technology risk. Now, cyber risk is also a market risk. But think for a moment, if all the lights go off because of a cyber attack, everything shuts down. Therefore, cyber risk subsumes all other risks in many ways. Now, assume for a minute if we have gone digital and if everything shuts down, what do we do unless we have paper records sitting in a vault somewhere? And that's the reality which I think many of the countries right now at all levels are preparing for. I think that relates to the question of risk. Going back to Zhong, I think Zhong, you've got a fascinating company. Congratulations on building that company. What you're doing is a great stuff. Going back to my first job as an algorithm strategist for the government of Hong Kong Treasury Management, I have been working with algorithms long before algorithms became popular. Then before that, I was in automotive industry working with robots. Before we saw Tesla robots, I think they're pretty much similar. But the challenge is what I'm seeing across all technologies, all models, is most of these issues are human issues. Even if you look at the current electric shortages going worldwide, there's a lot of discussions happening at national levels where people who are at the top levels are specifically saying, are these risks man-made? We can look at COVID and similarly, we can look at the global financial crisis. And I think in many areas, we will find that because of our limited understanding, which is based on past, not having enough data on how the what is called the big transitions happen on the econometric models, the big shifts happen, which you can't map the past data onto the current what is called econometric regimes, and that's where the big shifts could happen. Those are some thoughts, but I'll let other panelists pick up, and then we can circle back. Thank you, please.
Well, thanks, Jogi. That was quite interesting. So I hear you say all data is from the past, but all decisions are in the future. But I also hear you say, all models are wrong, which is quite challenging, quite interesting.
No. I'm not saying. I've been in modeling for all my life. Like going back before I did PhD, I was doing econometrics and econometric modeling, statistical modeling. But when I came to my PhD, the first thing I saw the top research journals, and the first thing I opened this top journal, I'm saying these models, mathematically they're precise, but in the real world they're wrong, because a lot of these theoretical models, like the Uber story. Uber was a great model they tried in a lab, but when they try to run that same model, that autonomous car, in a lab-like environment, now that is a perfectly smooth ride on a brilliantly lit road with nothing on it, and most people, humans, would not have tripped. But I think they had multiple systems failures. They had one cyclist crossing the road, and they had one person who was supposed to watch it, but that person was watching a TV program on a small screen instead of watching the road. Therefore, that tripped. But when you contrast this lab-like environment, and one of my presentation, which advances from model risk management means we can't get rid of model risk. That's a reality which many AI modelers, and there's a lot of articles, papers on that, people who have pioneered the neural networks, Jeffrey Hinton, for instance, and many other mathematicians, computer scientists, psychologists, and many other places. I think the biggest two issues are there, which I think go back to the early days where I wrote one of the earliest papers on what is now called meaning-driven AI or human-centered AI. The biggest challenge with all AI is that still there are two things there. AI can't know anything about AI. Doesn't have common sense. It doesn't have sense. Even a little kid, 3 years, 4 years old, has more common sense than AI. Okay, that means contextual awareness, unless you program everything into a rule-based logic. The paper which I wrote a long time ago, it was inspired by the founder of genetic algorithms, Dr. John Holland. He was at Santa Fe Institute, 1995. And I was doing the same thing which most computer scientists do. How do we have a self-adaptive machinery? We don't need any humans, automate everything. And that's the dream, holy grail everyone has been chasing. But the more and deeper I get into the mathematical computational basis of modeling over the last 20, 25 years, I realize again and again, it is the humans which will finally break or make the systems. It is the humans what they're programming. Sorry, go ahead. Sure.
Well, I think, thanks a lot for that, Jogi. And I think that's a great bridge to our next speaker, because I mean, I think he's challenging you a little bit here, and
No,
I
I'm
would
on his
like
side.
to.
I love what he's doing. I love what he's doing, but I'm a professional skepticist. I want to make sure those models work as they're expected, don't break down, and hackers don't take them over. That's a simple thing.
Yeah. So I would like to give the word to our next panelist. And I mean, you're an entrepreneur offering your customers cross-industry data, which you convert into value-adding credit information. And yeah, maybe you could do a short introduction of yourselves and take it away in your introduction, which I think Jogi paved the way for really nicely.
Okay, my name is J.S. Kang, the CEO of AZN. Okay, it's a very honor to be invited to the Fintech Kin. Like an introduction, I have been to set up this company around 5 years ago, focusing on the financial industries. The rationale for this entrepreneurship, the journey of this entrepreneurship, is starting from there might be a lot of data will flow into this market in coming years. And then as naturally, there's like new technologies is necessary to process, to convert into some kind of valuable information like credit. So this analogy is exactly applies to the other industries like oil industry. For example, in 100 years ago, when you go down into the oil industries, all you have to do is just plug in the pipe in the sand and just suck it up. Okay, that's all they need to do. And then now the shale gas has been identified. There's a lot of oils are reside underneath the sand, right? So the people, our businessmen, are thought about how to extract this kind of shells that is soaked into the sand. One of the technologies they have been developed is to dig into the deep inside and change the direction into the horizontal way. So that is one of the technologies they need to develop. Okay, then that is number one. And number two, the oil is embedded into the sand, right? So how to extract it? So they have been pouring the hot waters to liquidate the oils, right? And then that liquidated oil that you can tap to the ground. So after that, they need to do another processes to making up like another next level of industries. So to do that, they need to develop two technologies. One is the deep inside, and then liquidate it, right? So I think that the data industries, right? So data will, in whatever circumstances is, right? So there's a lot of issues around the data, there's the privacy issues and GDPR, whatever it is, right? That kind of issues will be resolved in the long run. So what kind of technologies is necessary to process it? So that is the AI, because so previously I have been working with financial institutions more than 10 years. What I have done is that all this kind of process has been conducted by the humans. So humans are downloading the data set and processing it. But in the future, as more data comes in, so enormous process is required to understand what is happening underneath the data set. So what is the necessary technologies to process it? So that is the artificial intelligence. So that's why we have been focused on the developing, the processing, the massive scale AI. So massive scale means that you can process thousands of algorithms in the real time. That is as a prerequisite technological stacks. And on top of that, to use this kind of technologies in the finance industries, which standard is very high, is that you need to keep the very high level of very regulatory framework. To do that, you need to have a very monitoring. And if something bad happens, then you need to correct the system. And then you need to minimize the bias issues. So there's a lot of issues are coming in this market when you apply these technologies into the financial institutions. So we have been developed this kind of technologies. And then for the last like 4 years, and then we have developed this and applying more than 40 financial institutions are using our technology stacks. And naturally, the data economy is emerging around the world. The data economy is something like platform companies, right? So that is a lot of sellers and buyers, and there's a mobility, and every company is becoming into the data economy. And then their naturally demand for the finance is increasing. But although the demand is increasing from the one side, the other side is a provider, supply side, is a traditional financial institutions having trouble to understand this kind of dynamic data streams. So they need somebody to understand on behalf of them, because the financial institutions want to try to catch up this kind of trend, but the intelligent people does not go into the finance industries, right? So they are more, they want to go into the more like tech industries. And then naturally, we are processing everything on behalf of bank. So that is what we call is a banking as a service. So we do everything from the customer acquisitions and the product development and the risk modeling, even underwriting we are doing on behalf of them. So, but by law, underwriting is a very core function of the financial institution. So that function should be inside of the financial institution. So there's a lot of very developing. The industry is developing. So what we are doing is to supply the loans to the e-commerce players. So not the sellers who is providing their product to the e-commerce platforms. That is number one category. And number two category is the EV battery market. So nowadays, is the most of the cars are transforming into the battery car, right? And naturally, around the 40% of the price of the car is a battery, right? So traditionally, the financial institutions have been originated the loans based on the auto, right? However, the battery itself is taking a very large portion of that. How can you finance based on battery, right? So they need to understand what is the mechanism of the battery, what is the residual value, how the driving environment and the driver's behavior affecting the residual value of the battery. That is the area that we can do the best. AI can do the best based on the informations that we capture, based on the 0.2 milliseconds. The battery is generating a lot of data, and then we are processing it. And based on that, we are calculating the residual value, and based on that, the financial institutions lend the loans. So that is what we are creating the market. And then the data itself is very important, but not many people understand how to understand it, right? That is number one. And how to make it as a financial product so the financial institutions can understand. So that is some area that we are doing mostly in Asian market and US market. But we have not tapped into the European market, but I assume that same demand will exist in the European market as well. So that is what we are doing as an entrepreneur, right? So starting from the AI technologies, that is a very necessary technologies to extract from the oil that is reside underneath it. And based on these technologies, we are helping the bank and data economy. So we are creating the value. So based on this value, so we are building our businesses globally. So thank you for
Thanks a lot, JS.
thank you
It's,
for
yeah. Thanks a lot, JS, for this introduction. I mean, you're really focusing to the valorization, basically, of the data for your customers, and to show them the way of how to valorize this data and turn it into information that they can use to innovate products.
right.
What I found interesting is, and I think that's also very interesting for the audience. I mean, obviously, you're working on adding great value to your customers, but I read that you also are working in the working group for AI, working on guidelines for AI. Could you tell something about that? Because that's an interesting double role, and I would like to know, and I think the audience would like to know as well, what the why you are doing it, and maybe you can say something about the crossover of the AI guidelines and your entrepreneurship.
Okay, right. So to expand this kind of AI technologies, especially in the financial institutions, we need some guideline because the financial institutions inevitably they are not willing to do by themselves in the first hand, right? So they're waiting until they have to. So we are working with the government about this, setting up the guideline. How can we work with third party, the AI companies from the banking side? So that is some guideline is necessary. So one of the guideline is that to outsource, to work with the third party, you need to do something. So you need to keep the data inside, and then you need to cloud, or you need to do something, right? So that is the one thing. But however, from our side, we are also touching the very core part of the financial institutions, like underwriting, which has been as a banned to outsource this kind of functionalities to the third party by law is globally. But this is changing at this moment naturally. So we are also designing how to work with this kind of framework, design the framework. Based on this framework, you can outsource or work with a third party to open these functionalities a third party. That is number one. And then we're also working with another country's like a guideline, which is that the AI is algorithmically is searching for the best optimal solutions, right? It inevitably creates a lot of bias issues. So from the starting point, if the colored people has been discriminated in the first hand, the algorithm is moving into that direction. Or female has been discriminated. In some genders can be do that. Some people reside in one area can be discriminated. And then that tendency can be strengthened inevitably if nobody has touched yet. If the algorithm is searching for the optimal positions, right? So to do that, to minimize that issues, we are creating some solutions to minimize this bias issues. So we have been developed to minimize fairness issues. It's increased the fairness issues using technologies. So with our systems, we are using reinforcement learning system where we can improve the fairness. It decreases the biases while maintaining the accuracies. That is some of the technologies that we are working with another country's government level.
Thanks, Jess. That's really interesting, and I'm sure we'll touch upon that later when we hit upon our discussion. And I think this is a great moment to move to our next speaker. Susan, I'm really happy to have you. It's quite interesting to notice also people listening. We have 4 people on the panel. and we're in 5 time zones. I mean, if you take the Lithuanian zones with that. So it's really, I mean, talking about harmonizing things, and I think that's really great. So I wanted to say us to the Lithuanians. For you, it's in the afternoon. It's 4:30, 5:30, I think. And Susan, what time are you in? And
Uh, yeah, it's let's see, it's just hit 11:36, so it's just
oh,
in
so
the morning. Yeah.
you're more fresh, and I think that's a great time to hit off on your intro. And I'm really curious because I mean, as all the other panelists as well, you've done too many things to mention, but I think you made a very interesting shift. You were a journalist for a very long time. You turned into an entrepreneur. You've got all kinds of different companies, but one that I want to mention and share on is the creation of human. Oh, wait a minute. Um, AI robots, humanoid AI
Yes.
robots. So I think
Uh,
you take it even further. I'd like to
oh,
ask
sure.
you, do your intro, please.
Oh, sure. I started as an on-air journalist when I was 16 on national radio as a simultaneous translator for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and became a journalist for 25 years, mostly business, but of course you write across all verticals. And then when I started writing about technology, those companies that I profiled and those founders turned around and would ask me to lead up their story or community strategy. So I took escalating for a Silicon Valley based AI company back in 2014 during the fourth wave, at which point things actually became useful. After the advent of backpropagation and gradient descent, and there were actual use cases to prove out those models. Because as you were saying, Yogesh, all models are inherently have a vulnerability because our world is not defined by the parameters that is defined in AI, and so. And of course, all math models have an inherent flaw in them, is that as many rotations as you have it, there's an inherent failure built into all models. Yes. And I really like,
Please go on.
and the,
I think I'll comment later. I think great points. Please continue.
yeah. I mean, I would love to hear your point on it. And,
Sure.
I really loved hearing, what you're doing as well, Changxi, about taking unstructured data and looking at data and turning them into insights and better analytics and cleaning it and making it more strong and useful. Because data on its own is just information. You cannot. It's shocking, actually, how unclean and unhygienic a lot of data strategy is in companies. You're talking about trillions of dollars of assets on an Excel spreadsheet that's not even locked. So it's fantastic that you're looking at data integrity and making them useful for the world, especially something as important as money and finance. When I look at technology, because of my background in journalism, I was able to take my learnings of how to take very complex things and break them down into a universal arc so that we can all understand exactly what it is that we're talking about. And using metaphors in ways that how everyday people might experience that technology and be able to translate it. So I don't, I see myself as a translator. I'm a translator of ideas and people's purposes and vision and how that technology might affect people's lives. And so I have a friend named Harry Kloor. He is a co-founder of the X Prize, Avatar. And when he was born a cripple with his legs turned 180 degrees backwards. And so as a child, he didn't learn how to run or walk until he was 8 years old. And this entire time, his entire life, he dreamed about having a robot body that would allow him to go past his physical capabilities, while at the same time making it safer and better for people to be able to work anywhere in the world that hands-on on-site work was needed. And so well in his 50s now, he's realized that vision with a fully functional prototype of a humanoid robot that is not trained by data, it's trained by humans. So with a VR set and haptic suit and feedback and full 360 audio, human beings are able to pilot this robot body and be able to learn very skill-specific tasks. And I agree with you, Yogesh. AI is never, ever going to be able to make decisions that human beings can make or creative or be humane. General AI is a joke. I'm sorry. And anyone that
No,
tells you that they're
it's
modeling
a,
the human brain is selling you something that is not going to happen for a very,
no,
very, very long time.
it's a tool like just any other tool. It's a tool. You can do anything with it.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, exactly. And like when people are like, "Oh my God, AI is going to turn around and kill us all," that's like saying, "Oh my God, a washing machine is going to overtake the role of mothers." It's like, no, it's stupid. So,
No, I think if you are
so with
if you're
this,
in the special ops, you know how to kill someone with a pencil. Pencil is not made for killing, but you can use a pencil. So people do that. The problem
well,
is, you can do anything with
well,
anything. You can take a computer and hit someone and kill someone with the computer. But
so
well,
yes, I agree
sure,
with you to a certain extent. I don't believe that
yeah.
all technology is inherently agnostic. I think it's the business models that really screw it up. If you incentivize poor behavior and allow gaps in the business models, because after all systems are inputs and outputs. Yes. And so in order to keep fidelity to what we're supposed to do, it's a multi-layer process, not just the technology. So that's why I really dislike topics like AI for ethics. Why aren't we talking more about, ethics in business? Why aren't we talking about data integrity? Why aren't we talking about technologies with philosophy, right? With philosophy of intent. So anyway, so Harry built these humanoid robots that human beings can pilot and train wherever on-site hands-on work is needed, and it has a very, very finesse movement. But the fascinating thing is also that as there is a pilot, you can also take on passengers. So while you're training the AI, you can also train people to specific parameters of a specific task that human beings were never meant to do or cannot do with great consistency and at great volume, or should never have at that volume and consistency and under dangerous or unpleasant conditions. And so all of this feeds into an AI brain, which then makes the robot semi-autonomous, so that now you can greater expand the scale of learning to hundreds and thousands or whoever has these VR sets and haptics feedback systems. And then to become on very task-specific things, such as cleaning a room, straightening a table, mixing a drink, becomes autonomous. And what that allows for with the creation of that training corpus is that now skilled workers from anywhere in the world can now train and do work from anywhere else without the hassle of geolocation and let's say the artificial borders, the construct of borders. And it allows people to then own that IP of that skill set that they've trained into a tokenized system in a multi-site marketplace. So that if somebody else uses your model to train your robot, your Biomni, then they retain the royalty rights. And we protect all of that with a double layered encryption standard, a blockchain based, zero knowledge for non-correlatable data. So first of all, those robots cannot be hacked. You would need a network of hundreds of thousands. And if so, even then within the time constraints, you would not be able to hack it. And it's quantum resistant. And you retain your sovereignty and data that is encrypted and stays attached to your identity, but without any correlatable data identifying who you are. So it's created a new marketplace and an ability for people to go beyond their physical limitations, as well as create new revenue streams for people to just simply be expert at what they do.
Well, thanks a lot, Susan. I mean, you say a lot of very interesting and very important things, I think. First of all, you point out, it's not about the technicals, it's about the story. And you don't need just
No, I
somebody.
didn't say that. Uh, yes, story is very important to be able, because before we can impart, and as you guys know, right, having been an entrepreneur, Jung, and Yogesh as a academic and teacher, before we can impart any knowledge into people, first we have to hack their hearts and we have to show them. Right? We have to make people care about the right things and incentivize the right behavior. There is a such thing as healthy self-interest. And so you're right. It's not about the tech solely. The tech is a tool, right? It's about the systems that we build. How do we incentivize good actor behavior with a healthy amount of self-interest, because we know that that's what works, right? And it's about looking at also the business models. For instance, as a journalist, our bread and butter was content and the stories and the storytelling. And the intent was always to be a pillar of democracy, to inform people, right? Which is a tool, which is a vehicle. But yet the ad revenue models and the structure and the business of news and content tells us that it doesn't matter if we put out good stories. We just have to make them hit that button like a monkey, right? And which is what the internet and digital content has done, is turn people into basically like whack-a-mole monkeys. So you can have very good things, but unless the business structure and the systems that we build them into and the ad revenue, not the revenue and the business models also comply to the fidelity of our intent, good things can get messed up very, very fast.
Yeah, so and I think that's also a big call out for the people in the audience. I think you very nicely combine that we need new business models to enable and empower trust. And trust is, I think, the only thing that's really going to tick this whole business. If we should empower trust, and we need new business models to do so. So maybe that's a good one-liner to do a small round. And Joby, maybe I can get back to you on trust and business models. Maybe you can say something on how the use of risk models and how you were talking about, if the world stays the same, we wouldn't even need the model. But maybe you can say something about trust in that direction.
Sure. I think I'll start from Suzanne. I think, Suzanne, you have got fascinating perspectives. Although you are not trained as an engineer, I know you had engineers as parents, but I think you've got a great philosophical mindset. And the way you are able to connect the dots, I think you mentioned somewhere the philosophy and efficiency, without value system, it's a lot of efficiency, but there's no kind of outcome or goal. And one point which you mentioned is the foundation of a lot of my R&D, which is driving practices. Like, I just happen to be a person who founded the first top digital site, search engine social network, got invited to Silicon Valley to guide everyone. From that point on, I've been building leading global digital practices. But I describe myself as a scientist, economist, quant, engineer, and hacker. Because for first 20 years, it was building systems, optimization, efficiencies, what we're doing with AI. Having written one of the earlier pieces in AI, having actually guided, most recently served as industry expert for AI machine learning, including stuff which you have been doing in-depth, NLU, NLP, and so forth, in the natural language processing. And natural language processing is a fascinating tool. And going back to Jung's focus on regulatory issues, underwriting issues, companies like JP Morgan, for which I advise at the very top post level, the quants, GMs, and so forth, in building liquidity risk modeling for managing $500-600 billion of alternative assets, complex, they are using them very effectively. But the big difference, if you look at the theory on one side, what academic scientists do, and what practitioners do, I'm a scholar practitioner, I bridge the gap. Therefore, what we see is a lot of stuff being done in academia is very theoretical. It's normal science. Normal science means it's a status quo. When I came into the academia after 8-10 years as a practice, building global financial systems applied worldwide by the big three IT banking finance companies, first thing, when I questioned the model, which is at the foundation of adoption, digital adoption, I wrote one of the earlier PhD theses on digital adoption for the World Wide Web. When I questioned the foundations of this sacred cause, which everyone was holding kind of sacred there, they said, mentioned that psychology, you're taking this foundation, the issue, I think, which goes back to the heart of discussion of trust, which Marianne mentioned, the notion of self-determination, of control. And the primary focus was the self-determination. I've done a lot of research, worked on that earlier. But when I looked at those constructs of human volition, they are fundamentally, inaccurately translated from psychology to IT, and everyone has built on those foundations. When I go back to the top academics, they said if you want to publish in IT, you have to toe the line or you go publish in psychology. Therefore, Thomas Kuhn, who is known for structure of scientific revolutions, who defined the term paradigm shift, that is where everyone is doing the normal science. When you mention in journalism, the same phenomena I see operating across the various sites. Because in journalism, I have had the fortunate pleasure of being interviewed by most of the top magazines, journals, with interviews in Fortune, Inc., Wall Street Journal. We've been covered at least 4 times after I stopped counting, CIO Magazine, CIO Insight, both the computing and technology side. Journalists are fascinating. People like you who actually have a mission trying to offer informed understanding without bias. I think those are precious, precious people in journalism, especially in nowadays. The same thing about academia, scientists, and people like Yun. Yun, you are doing fascinating work in some areas like underwriting and things like regulatory, where there's a lot of legal documents, agreed standards, constructs, which you can use NLP, NLU. Those things are being applied in a very fascinating way. And Harry Kloor, it's a fascinating story. He's a fascinating guy. I was reading up on him after knowing from you. He's one of the most, I can say one of the most beautiful minds. He had a double PhD in his times, chemistry and physics. And if I look at his portfolio now, he's producing movies and whatnot. Fascinating, fascinating story. And I would wish that his humanoid robot, I would love to see that come to fruition. Because in the recent one-to-one, I kind of take what's the inputs and outputs. But instead of looking at inputs, I start from the outcomes. And I see, are those inputs, are they hype, are they reality, or somewhere in the middle, depending on if they hit the target. And those targets could be in the short term, long term, at any different level. I focus on systems, of which AI, machine learning are one kind of systems. But going back to your issue of NLP, NLU, and which is natural language processing, natural language understanding, for those who may be looking at this jargon, because in the MIT AI machine learning program, for which I served as industry expert, we cover AI, machine learning, deep learning, and NLP in addition to robotic process automation. And we had management, leadership, industry executives from companies like Google, Microsoft, Tesla, and these people are rolling out strategies, executing, deploying them. And we had a lot of people working, especially in the legal area, doing a lot of great stuff with NLP. Although, if you see in contrast, in the last week, Singapore Health Ministry, they had a chatbot which they deployed. And the kind of mistakes that chatbot was making have made headlines. Like in the COVID context, someone was asking what I should do, and what it was talking about was total tangential about something totally different, about birth control instead of COVID. I think we can read up on that. But earlier we had heard about the Microsoft's chatbot. Then earlier, if you go back to Ray Kurzweil, interesting guy again. Long ago, I was having my undergrads. I was a full professor earlier before kind of building these companies, guiding CEOs. I had my undergrads hack his avatar called Ramona, which was a chatbot. We used to hack it all the time, and we used to see the same results we are seeing right now. The question is, have we progressed? Having made so much progress, Jung is doing some fascinating work. We have made some progress in some areas. But in other areas like sense-making, meaning, where we can have trust, where we can have governance, control, we still are struggling. But let me pass it on to Marianne. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to pass it on to JS, because I would like to pop the question to you as well. How do you how do you relate to this trust issue, and how do you make sure that the risks that can be hyperbolically, if you start from the wrong data set and have not the right focus on diversity, and how do you do that in your maybe you can say something about that.
I think if I may start, Marianne, a big one observation to start, if you may please cover that, address that as you go. In the cyber crypto domain, we focus on zero trust. The challenge with zero trust now is the foundation of all IT infrastructure, going back to the DARPA, was made to trust everything. Therefore, if you can please reconcile trust everything technology basis to where we are trying to do zero trust with the soft infrastructure, which Marianne mentioned with Intel companies, by tying to things like differential privacy, homomorphic encryption. Please.
Yeah, so there's a lot of layers that you need to focus on. The first layer that you need to be careful is that the genuity of the source of information. So that is the first layer. And then number two is that some of the ambiguity or untransparency that happens during the processing the data. And then and the third layer is that the decisions that you make based on this information. So from our world in the banking industries, then there's a lot of there's a feedback loop happen. For example, in the end, we're starting from the later part, right? So whatever information that we gather, then we process it, and then we make decisions, right? And then decisions generates means that they originate the loans. And then we are comparing the assumptions that we make based on the information that we have at that point. And then we can generate another layer of information that we can compare together. So if the assumptions matches with the results, it means that our information is relatively correct. And then if some information does not match compared to our assumption, something wrong happens. So something wrong means that the informations that we gather can be wrong. We can identify it as a fraud, or wrong information can be captured. So based on this process, that we can dive into the more earlier part of the data generation pipeline. So to do that, we in Korea, we acquired one of the cash management aggregators. We acquired it to acquire very pure information. To do that, we acquire. So meaning that we are creating a very pure value chain, like a Rockefeller. They are doing the vertical integrations from the generations, from the reserve to the ending like manufacturing side. And then also they are dominating the transportation, the railroad. So we are trying to integrate the value chains from the beginning. So as a second step, so we are building the credit bureau. It's our own credit bureau we are applying for the government. So traditionally, the credit bureau system has been focused on the more like a personal side. So how much you earn, how much debt you have, how much delinquency you have. So this kind of information is the core data part of the personal level of the credit bureau. And then the other side of the credit bureau is focused on the company side. It's S&P, right? It's Moody's, more like a tradable side. And then more like the small size of the companies, no credit bureau existing globally. So we are creating the e-commerce and the data economy, the credit bureau, on which that the data sellers can participate as a shareholder, right? And then also they can sell their data to this credit bureau. So we are creating a marketplace where the genuine and the very pure data can be tradable. For example, as a shareholder of the credit bureau, are willing to buy their data because the genuinity and purity of the data creates a value to the third party. The creates value means more revenue side. And then that ecosystem helps them to provide more pure data. And on top of that, and then even the company data provider who is not belongs to as a shareholder, they are willing to sell their data. And then if the data is valuable, that will generate more revenue from their side. So we are creating a more like a systematic approaches.
Yeah.
I
So
think
we're back
referring
at
to what, sorry, if I may ask a quick question, follow up to Shung what he said. You mentioned earlier you're using reinforcement learning. Therefore, that is likely based on some kind of a deep learning models like the convolutional neural networks, recurrent neural networks, or long-term short memory networks. What kind of deep learning technologies are you using in reinforcement learning and in other processes like you
Yes.
mentioned the underwriting and other processes?
Yeah, in the reinforcement learning system, we are applying for the reducing the bias issues. Okay, so increasing the fairness issues. That is a very critical part of the financial institutions. So how we do is that using the deep Q algorithms. So algorithm itself is not enough to apply for the financial institutions. So we applying these algorithms to improve the fairness. For example, if you identify the gender is some bias issues, so you need to remove it, right? So to do that, we are we are setting up some kind of samplings to improve the fairness. There is some kind of criteria that we are monitoring. So this is some of the very basic techniques that we
Sure.
are
I
using.
think for all deep learning technologies, I think I'm going to relate to both Marianne and Suzanne's points. And then again, you're back to you. I think for all deep learning technologies, the main workhorse which we use, I think, Suzanne, you mentioned it, the stochastic SGD, stochastic gradient descent backpropagation algorithm. That is the
Yes.
primary workhorse for all deep learning technology. What if you came
Yes.
to know that the big godfather, who is one of the 3 Turing Prize winners, Jeffrey Hinton, he wrote in an
Hmm.
article which you
Yeah.
can find on my feed. He said, it's all wrong. We need to throw it out. We can't trust it. Now, we don't have anything better than that, but you can't trust it. Now, back to you, Marianne. Given that the fundamental working horse algorithm of all deep learning technologies, SGD backprop, you can't really, even the person who's the pioneer, he himself says he can't trust it. Then how do you trust it? And Suzanne, you, and especially back to you in reinforcement learning. There's other issues with reinforcement learning, which I'll come back to later. Some of the people who presented with me at Princeton, and there's a lot of great work coming out of Courant Institute, which is the hub of mathematical science in quant finance in New York. They are doing a lot of fascinating work. We'll come back to that later, if I'm allowed. Please.
I'd like to. We could go on for hours. It's very interesting, but I'd like to also be conscious of the time. So what I would like to ask is go to Susan, and maybe Susan, you can do 2 things for me. Maybe you can react to what Yogi was saying, and then I'm going to ask you another question as well.
Great. So I think what you were asking is if you cannot trust deep learning, or if you cannot trust deep learning as a methodology, and I think people be quite honest in working with deep learning and neural networks, that it doesn't work all the time. It doesn't work terribly well. It's terribly expensive, and it only works to specific tasks with specific data sets and server capacities. Correct? Right? And it's tremendously expensive.
Okay. Look at it this way. It is mathematically precise, but functionally actually incorrect. Think of this way.
Yes.
We got eyes,
Correct.
nose, face, ears. What if you give to that algorithm in convolutional neural network? You can put a pair of ears somewhere and nose and eyes. It'll add mathematically equal to actual face, which is
Sure.
the big.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. So, I mean, from what I understand from in terms of Beyond Imagination and Beyond, they're using a lot of machine learning, but not really deep learning, because the training sets, because the machines are being trained by direct human beings, by motions, which is simply pattern recognition and strictly rudimentary machine learning. But each of those functions are built into different modalities to kind of replicate a very simplified human brain. Put together in different parts. So as you know, machine learning works best when the parameters are restricted. It's given a very specific task and given a limited data set specific to that task. And that stuff works perfectly well. So I don't even know why we would use deep learning. In fact, unless you are working on Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
because what is happening in 2012 is when all these things came out. Jeffrey Hinton, or the winter new kind of spring
Sure.
came out, and now basically I think
Sure.
with
Sure.
few more observations we are seeing another kind of. I'm not as much worried about AI winter. I'm more worried about a nuclear winter. Recently, my guidance was to the top chiefs where they're applying these things, and my question was, if you do not know what
Nuclear.
you're doing, you can blow the whole world, and you may not know what happened. But back to you, Marianne. So.
Oh no! Oh, sorry. I just need to look. Everyone has nukes. It's almost as if because everyone has them so much, nobody wants to set that flare. I am much, much more worried about disinformation, undeclared wars, using disinformation to enact bio warfare, to enact economic warfare. It feels like there's layer upon layers of different sort of conflicts happening, and it's not as easily defined by geolocation base. Right? They're just really interesting cluster from power structures coming in at play. That's what more if I'm worried about. You wish it was that obvious.
Yeah. Well, I think we were talking about seasons. We can talk for seasons, but I would like to thank you all a lot, because I think although we can't conclude all our discussions, I think we sparked with the audience the interest to really dive into this, into the challenges, and learn and read, and look us all up at LinkedIn, look at our Twitter, read what we mentioned. And what I would like to ask the four panelists, I would like to ask you one question, and I'll do it in order. And I would we have not a lot of time, so I would be really happy with a one-liner. But I would like to ask you, what is your gift to the audience? So if you think about your message, and if you think about all these entrepreneurs listening, and people in fintech and thinking about AI, what is your gift, your one-liner gift for the audience? And I would like to start with you, JS.
Yeah. So technology is improving the people's life in terms of finance with AI technologies.
That's a promising one-liner. Thanks a lot. Susan, over to you.
I want machines to do all the heavy lifting so that it frees people to become more human and humane.
That adds the human touch. Really like it. And Jogi, and I'm going to be really strict because you asked me before. I asked for a one-liner gift here. What is
Sure.
your one-liner gift for the audience?
I think that's the key line for our latest AML exchange venture from Air Force Research Lab. It says the greatest legacy we can leave the world is the world. And that's where I think the AML cyber crypto need better understanding of governance control issues. That's the big challenge. We can lose the world if we do not pay attention. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. You were a great panel. I think my one-liner would be, in order to build this trust, we really need to focus on data sovereignty and enable people and organizations to govern and manage the data they generate. And with that, I would like to thank you a lot in all your different time zones. And in Lithuanian, I just learned I have to say to you, "Asiu," which means thank you. And that means thank you.
Asiu.
Mariana, thank you very much for your moderation of that panel session. I found it a very spirited discussion. I was almost philosophical, quite deep, big issues about the world being dealt with there. What are some of your takeaways and key points from it?
Yes, it was a great ride. And well, I promised to throw some meaning in the discussion, and I think we did. So, and I think these big issues are exactly what's on the table. These are the pink elephant in the room. So I think my takeaways is, if you're in this world of AI and fintech and creating all these services, make sure you're not just focusing on software development and technical stuff. Make sure you focus on your story, and not just because of people wanting to know what services and products you have, but your real story. make sure your story is okay. Make sure your story serves the world and the people. And make sure in your story you make room for the people and organizations and give them control over the data they generate. So, and then of course, be aware of the risks and put them in your story. So, I would say that's my takeaway.
Okay, so could you just drill in for a moment on what it means to, like, what's your story? Like, what you're communicating to people, like the message that your customers is telling about you and your product. Is that what you mean by that?
Yes, that's exactly what I mean with it. So I think we focus on a tech sometimes. We have this idea, we work with a lot of fintech companies, also a lot of other companies, but it holds for all organizations. You have this great idea of a service and product, and you want to bring it to your customers. And of course, at the heart of this idea lies some technology or some service you do. But for your audience, it's about what value do you deliver? And I think for a lot of startups in fintech and in AI, it's that what is really important. And again, it's not just a marketing or communication thing. I think it's just like Susan said, if you can explain it, then you have to be really clear about your motivations and about your vision and stance on things that we hit also in the discussion, like trust, diversity, inclusion. How does that is all incorporated in your story? And I think also looking at the regulation that's coming up, it's not just a compliance issue. It's really going to be adamant. Put humans and organizations at the center of your services. So that's what I think people should take away from this discussion.
I like that. Some very good thoughts. Mariana, thank you very much for your time today. Have a good day.
As you, Lewis.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for watching this panel session. We'll see you on the next one.